Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. Welcome to the 8th episode of our free weekly live webinars brought to you by the Football Business Academy in partnership with SoccerX. My name is Christian Dobrev. I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer at the FBA, and I'll be moderating this webinar. As always, I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who tuned in for last week's amazing episode in which we looked at the impact of COVID-19 on women's football with Tatiana Haini, Mike Gollop, Nicole Allison, and Pedro Malabia. If you missed it, don't worry, be sure to check it out later as the recording is available on our YouTube channel or indeed on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer the audio version. For those of you who are new and hadn't heard about the FBA before, we are a Swiss-based educational institution entirely focused on the football industry. We run a professional master degree in football business, and we also run a number of tailor-made certificates around the world. Each week of this webinar series, we gather football industry experts who share different perspectives on how COVID-19 is affecting the world of football. Today, in our webinar titled Workforce Transformation in the Age of COVID-19, we'll look at the intersection of human resource management, recruitment, education, and personal branding. And our guests will share insights on what has happened over these past 2 months of global confinement and what will likely happen over the next months so that our viewers and listeners can prepare for the realities of tomorrow and come out stronger. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests for today's session. To start, we have Rose Reed, who is the head of people and culture at Brighton and Hove Albion FC, who since the beginning of this year are partners of the FBA. Then we have Raphael Fiche, who is senior brand recruiter at adidas, joining us from their headquarters in Germany. Then, given the relevance of her know-how and expertise, we've also invited our very own CMO and higher education expert, Alejandra Otero. And last but not least, we have Charlotte Hamilton, who is the Associate Dean for Community Engagement and Impact at Nova School of Business and Economics, one of the most prestigious schools in Portugal, and indeed, since a month and a half ago, also a partner of the FBA. Welcome to all four of you. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Hope everyone is doing fine. Rose, let's start with you. So over the past 2 months, what has been particularly challenging for you, for your colleagues? How do you do this thing of, putting everyone to remote workly? How do you do your job, not being able to see everyone on a daily basis, right? What are the challenges that you have encountered? And maybe also what are the challenges that you foresee once the Premier League kicks back into action?
Well, for me personally, I'm quite a feel person. So I get a lot of my cues from being around people, and I can sense when things aren't right from being around people. So working from home has been quite a big challenge for me. I feel like a massive sense of responsibility for the sort of 1,000 staff that we employ across Brighton and Hove Albion and Albion in the community. So I sort of feel that responsibility. And I'm acutely aware that all of those people will have a very different experience and a unique experience of lockdown. So there's no one size fits all. And I think it's been a real challenge to make sure we don't categorise or make assumptions about what people's experience has been. I think as a leadership team, the challenge has been to keep people engaged and try and make sure that everybody sort of feels reached. So whether that's through all staff meetings or through quiz nights, the charity have even set up like a virtual pub, the Albion Arms, to make sure that people feel kind of connected with the club. And again, to make sure that we try and take into consideration their unique experience of lockdown. And I think, again, without generalising, I think the biggest group that's had the biggest challenge, if you like, and again, this doesn't go for all of working parents, but I do feel that working parents seem to have had a particularly difficult or sustained difficult time. And I think that experience of having to juggle schooling, teenagers, babies, toddlers, has been really real. And despite all of our assurances that, it's absolutely fine if you cannot do a full day's work, because, we totally recognise you've got a lot going on, people are still feeling quite guilty, and particularly working mums, but also working dads too. So yeah, so the challenges have been quite across quite a broad piece, if you like.
Yeah. And then for the foreseeable future, once the football games start taking place again, and people are slowly starting to go back to the office, what are the challenges you see there?
Yeah, well, I think we're moving from a transition of kind of what we're calling like lockdown anxiety. So there's a lot of impact on mental health and well-being, and that's going to move very quickly to what we're calling sort of transition anxiety, which is a kind of a word we've coined just this morning, actually, and making sure that, again, just as we have in lockdown, making sure that everyone's experience of returning back to, I mean, we can't call it normal, and I don't really like the word new normal, but that's what it's going to be. And everyone's experience of that we recognise that, again, that'll be an individual experience for those people. So I think as we start to build our plan, and we've had our first meeting this morning around how to start building that phased plan in line with the government easing of restrictions, it's making sure that we have dialogue with staff early doors, and we recognise that, you know, they're all going to have their own concerns and worries. And I think, what else was I going to say? And I think, yeah, the actual transition itself, there's so many elements of the transition that are out of our control. So we can put in place all sorts of measures around, you know, phasing people back into the buildings over the next few months, possibly over several months. But how are they going to get to work, and what factors are going to be of concern to those people? And all those factors, some of them we can't control. So how are we going to manage that? So yeah, there's going to be some really big challenges. So yeah, we're definitely not going to be bored, that's for sure.
Alejandra, in the higher education industry as well, there's been obviously an acute need to change pretty much everything, I guess, right? Some schools and universities may have been better prepared than others, but overall, like, what have you been observing? What are the realities of the higher education industry right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christian. I think that none of us were prepared. That's a reality. It has been a huge challenge for schools who have to just go completely online or on a remote working system from one day to the other, or at least try to catch up with a few hours or weeks, or even within a certain month. But also for professors, all the faculty members that were not trained to teach online and keep that engagement that is now expected in long sessions on Zoom, for example. There's also the student population, which of course was very much affected. Imagine international students. So some of them actually arrived on campus, they were very excited, their spring semester was starting, and then, sorry, the actual student experience as it was initially thought, or as they had in their expectations, is, I mean, they need to adapt. You can take that as well for every single person. None of us were prepared. All of a sudden, we need to start teaching online, to start as administrators finding interactive and collaborative ways to make sure that we are there for the students, but at the same time for the employers, because in the end, this is going to be part of the transition that Rose was talking about, and is what's the role of the school? The role of the school is to prepare those talents for the workforce of tomorrow, right? So there has been a very big impact in that sense. Companies who are also pushed to change their actual business plans just to be able to survive throughout a crisis that no one ever thought of. So it's without any doubt, it has been a challenge for everyone. Now, I do think, and from what I've seen in the educational environment, that this is crucial for education, and I would take it as an opportunity actually to rethink all of this basic or traditional education as it has been until now. And if I may, we're talking about work, but we're also talking about education, right? And if I may just draw a line in each of our lives, we start by education, we then go into the working environment, and hopefully we continue through lifelong learning, going through actually some trainings throughout our whole career as well. So education has a huge impact no matter what, whether it's to prepare the leaders of tomorrow or to actually continue in that growth process throughout the working years. So in that sense, that has been a huge challenge that now education institutions have a sort of a bigger compromise to actually train those leaders of tomorrow in new jobs that potentially didn't exist until the pre-COVID situation. And I have seen a sort of a rush of agility to find which institution or which teams are more prepared to actually come up with this pioneering idea of how we can contribute to tomorrow's workforce development, right? So I do think that that's going to be a crucial change for the education environment. And again, let's take this as an opportunity.
Great. Charlotte, from your side, of course, Nova, you've also been obliged to adapt really fast, and with so many students, professors, and programs, I can only imagine how tough that must have been. But just in like in any organization, its leadership must react quickly, identify the key areas to focus on, support its people, reallocates resources, of course. What can you tell us about how all of this transpired at Nova?
I'm going to skip the bit that's very similar to Rose and Raphael's account, which is we were well prepared. We had a committee and task force in place and the relevant respective leaders from the different areas. So all of that was well catered for. The technology side of things also, we were fine, really. We have a digital transformation strategy that we had started some years ago. What we did was accelerate it. It's obviously not a perfect nor adequate response to the new needs, but it's definitely a very, very good step in the right direction. I think Nova as a business school, I think the country and our stakeholders, both internally and externally, look to us for a vision of what's to come. And as Alejandra said very rightly, we are training the leaders of the future, right? So it's really important that we don't catastrophize and focus on the pragmatic and immediate responses to the crisis. And I think that's what we did. We tried to align the internal and the external stakeholders and bring everybody into one space, which is part of what I was talking to you about, role to play. We started an initiative where we brought all of our impact under one umbrella, which is the role to play initiative, that is now becoming a movement, bringing in different members of our communities to address all sorts of issues that are happening out there, right from reevaluating our research offering to and consultancy offer, looking at how our students can work with local micro and small organizations to address their immediate needs. So we're bringing everybody together. It's a very intimate kind of space. I think the important thing here, the message that I think distinguishes our response perhaps from others, is we had always have very clear and consistent leadership, and I think that's really important. We've had a dean that knew how to handle this from the get-go and managed to galvanize that kind of collective spirit. So we've all been in it together. But most importantly, he listens. So we've listened to our students, we've listened to our staff, we've heard their difficulties and their challenges, and we have responded to that, not in a matter of days, responded to that immediately. So there's the parenting issue that Rose brought up, but there's also the caring issue. We have many of our staff who are caring. They have caring responsibilities for elderly parents, for grandparents. Then we have a huge range of people living and thriving normally well with mental health issues that are also need to be considered. And so we've had to readjust what we do as an organization. And I think, Rose, you said it beautifully, where you said it's about looking at what's possible within the current environment and trying to find the best for each individual and not having unrealistic expectations. I think somebody summed it up really well, where they said it's not working from home, it's you're at home working during a crisis. And I think having that in mind and being compassionate to that has been at the sort of the heart of everything we've been doing.
Thanks, Charlotte. Rose, speaking of this environment, right, this new virtual environment that we've all gotten used to some shape or form over the past almost 2 months now, what has surprised you the most, and what kind of opportunities have you identified specifically perhaps for your department as well?
I think the biggest surprise, it shouldn't be a surprise, but I think I was just in awe really of the resilience, the response from staff. And probably, I'm sure many people will have the same view. I mean, people staggered me. They've been so resilient, so resourceful, so quick to adapt. You know, we've had people like, you know, a 70-year-old who's never kind of used Microsoft Teams, who, you know, on day one said, "I've done Teams," I say people have just been so willing, and not only to help each other, you know, in the football club, but also to reach out to the community. And we had this wonderful initiative where we decided we wanted to call very early on in the lockdown all of our over 70s fans. We've got quite a large fan base over 70s, and several thousand calls were made. And we've asked for volunteers from across the football club because our ticketing and supporter services team is quite small. And 80 staff stepped forward. And so we had like physios on the phone, Paul Barber made phone calls, Tony Bloom, our owner, made phone calls, our technical director, a couple of players got involved, and you know, people who worked in the shop, everyone just jumped on these calls, and it was absolutely wonderful. And there were some really funny stories as well. There was, you know, one guy who was 88 or something, and Paul Barber had to ring him about 5 times, and he was out every time Paul phoned. You know, and Paul's like, "You're meant to be looking after yourself." But it was, yeah, everyone was just so willing. And we also had another initiative with which our charity worked with a local restaurant to deliver food. So the food was taken to our training ground. Again, probably, you know, I think about 30 volunteers from the charity stepped forward, and they went out in the boiling heat with all their call boxes and all their health and safety guidelines on the food, and they delivered all this food into the most vulnerable parts of our community locally. And again, people were just so willing to help. So I think that's been really really kind of quite staggering, really. And people, they want to do what's right. They want to do what's right for the football club. They want to work. They're apologising if they can't work, if they're trying to, you know, look after a toddler. So it's been quite amazing, really. And in terms of the opportunities, I think, you know, like other people have said earlier, there are lots of opportunities. I think the first one is the way we work. And I think as people and HR people, we all sit there sometimes getting a bit frustrated, don't we? Because we sort of think, oh God, you know, we could do this, and we could digitalise, and we could have more flexible working. And I think what COVID's done is it's just accelerated and propelled all those ideas, and it's made them real already, which is really fantastic. So I think the way we work will definitely change. I think there'll be far more flexibility. And I think what I really like the most is we have no choice now. We are basically saying to people, it's the outcome. So this is the outcome that we need. We need 3,000 phone calls to be made to the elderly in the next few weeks. How you do it and who does it, that's far more up for creativity and flexibility. And that to me is like really refreshing, because I think what that then brings is people can bring their own flair to the role, and they can also start working to their strengths without this kind of, I think, you know, we've all got a little bit of micromanaging in us, if we're really honest. And I think, you know, it's easy to say to people, isn't it, this is what I want doing, and this is how I think you should do it, and kind of steer people. But now it's just so refreshing because we're just allowing them to do it their own way and just focusing on that outcome. So that's really exciting for me. I think commercially, there are some exciting challenges. I mean, we're facing the prospect of playing behind closed doors for, you know, if the season plays out, which we hope it does, it will be behind closed doors. It's quite feasible that part of next season will be behind closed doors. And that brings with it some commercial challenges, but also some opportunities. So some of the early ideas the commercial team have been looking at, for example, is looking at the stadium as a blank canvas. You've got 30,000 empty seats. How do we monetize that and make that a much more exciting proposition than just this kind of empty stadium? There's also some really nice, and again, some really creative ideas about creating this kind of virtual hospitality. So we've got 1,000 regular hospitality customers who come and enjoy games. They've all got their favourite seat, they've got their favourite pie, their favourite pint. So how about if we could deliver that to their home, deliver their favourite pint, deliver their favourite bottle of wine and a pie and a Brighton Hove Albion scarf, and not necessarily looking to make huge amounts of profit from that, but just as a way to engage and excite and keep that hospitality experience alive, but in a completely different way. So that's been a really exciting, a few of exciting opportunities coming out there. So yeah, I'd be disappointed if we don't maximise all the opportunities that come out of COVID, because I think there are lots.
Absolutely. Like the students or employees already was very important and was quite effective, right? But it will undoubtedly increase even more, right, in this new age of COVID-19 and afterwards. What are some of the thought leaders and maybe platforms such as, I don't know, LinkedIn saying about all this?
Yeah, I think I'll hop on some of the elements that were shared by Rafa on this one. Yes, people are actually expecting us to take this time to upskill, as you mentioned, and no wonder that TED conferences is the profile that is the most followed on LinkedIn, actually. Something very interesting as well, I think it's going to be how the interviews are gonna be like afterwards, because if we go to some little statistics on LinkedIn, which actually, thank God it exists, because it's a platform that is actually bringing a lot of the ecosystem together in this new digital world. They are providing us with a lot of business intelligence as well. And I do think that now we really need to stick to what's happening on the platform to actually improve our understanding of future trends. And if we see, for example, that some of the most used terms right now in LinkedIn are things like crisis management, online collaboration, remote working, then those would be some of the skills that future employers would be waiting for their employees to have, right? And if you cannot right now say in an interview, what did you do during these 2 months to actually upskill in those terms, then it's going to be a little tricky, let's say, within the recruitment process, right? So that's something that needs to be taken into account. But I also think that, again, going back to opportunities, this is really an opportunity to be more present right now on social media. If you think about the main element that is happening right now in the digital ecosystem, it's content. Everyone is craving for content. Everyone wants to be present some way. And even if there's not much actually happening right now in terms of revenue, as Rose was mentioning, I do think that right now it's the moment for everyone actually to be there, be visible. And even if you cannot write an article, for example, that's absolutely fine. But there comes a point where we're looking for that human sense. And whenever we get a comment from someone, or someone gives me a little heart instead of a like, or gives me a light bulb on LinkedIn, the relationship is different. And this is where actually the online interactions are taking us. So I do think that we'll come stronger afterwards, but this is a transition that all of us need to be aware of. And it's also enabling us to actually reach to people that we weren't supposed to, or we weren't allowed to reach before. Because right now, a lot of CEOs, for example, and decision-making people are themselves communicating on LinkedIn. And if you are interested in entering this job market, now you can just send this person a LinkedIn message, or say, hey, that article is really great. And even if it's little tiny details, at least you're making yourself visible throughout this period where we're all confined, right? So I do think that those are part of the expectations of tomorrow's employment.
Great. Charlotte, yeah, in spite of all the positivism and optimism that we see here on this panel today, there are a lot of people that are negative or pessimistic, in times of crisis. But yeah, those people might forget that actually it is exactly in these times that innovation oftentimes takes place, right? So what can you recommend individuals, companies, schools to do? How can they embrace this mindset, and how can they actually be game changers?
Okay, well, firstly, I think that innovation, let's remind ourselves what innovation is. It's the creation of new, right? And as Rose said, this is the new normal. So in fact, we're all innovating right now, as far as I'm concerned. We're all responding to a new reality. We are adapting our working methods, the way we run our families, our homes, all of that. So I think the first point of departure is to say we are all innovators right now. So it's a good thing. The second thing is that I think that problems are the breeding ground for innovation. And I think a crisis is a wonderful space for people to reassess what they're doing, their working methods, the structure in their organizations, and to take, I guess, to move at a quicker pace and to take risks that perhaps they weren't necessarily prepared to take before, because we have a really quick turnaround now. So you have an opportunity to trial something, doesn't work out, go back, refine it, and keep that constant flow of sort of continued development going on. I think if I were to say anything to organizations, to schools, I think it's about breaking down barriers so that the individual, the person on the street, the person living at home who perhaps is isolated right now, who wants to make a contribution, who wants to be part of that innovative response, that creativity, that collective creativity, has the conduit through which to do that. I think that sometimes what happens in corporates and big organizations is that the sort of intrapreneurship, the creativity is happening on the inside. And in fact, there is this nice little kind of sort of wall around the outside that's perhaps preventing the corporates from being as close to the public and to the people that they're trying to reach as they could be. And I think now, because we've moved almost everything digital, now is a really cool time to bring people closer together and to say, actually, you know what, we've got space to bring in more focus groups. We've got space to create online polls and platforms. We'll break down those, even if they're myths or perceived barriers, just break them down and bring everybody that much closer together, because I think we're united by purpose right now. And I think now is the time to take all of the energy that's coming from everybody, because you can feel it. Even the guy in the street that's really annoyed because he has to stay home, he's passionate. And if you have a way to channel that passion, I think only great, wonderful things can come from this. But again, my word of caution would be, not everybody feels equipped to innovate. They don't understand necessarily how you go about doing that, and they don't feel that they have the ability to make that contribution. So we as educators owe it to the wider sphere to say everybody counts, everybody's contribution is important, and everybody has an opportunity to contribute to this debate and to have an impact, be it on an individual level or as a collective. So I think it's about that. It's about creating a space, breaking down barriers, and allowing people to make their own contribution in whatever shape or form that might come in.
Thanks, Charlotte. Rose, this actually brings us to an interesting question regarding the employee life cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, what Charlotte just said kind of like touches on exactly that, right? So, and for those that don't know, employee life cycle being recruitment, onboarding, transitioning, and retaining, right? How do you foresee that life cycle to change over the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months? And what kind of trends maybe do you foresee at Brighton or at football clubs in general in that line?
I think I'd like to think that staff retention will be really high over the coming year. And I think obviously there'll be the obvious reasons for that. The jobs market might not be a good time to move on if people were previously thinking about moving on. But more so, I would like to think that the goodwill that's been shown to people by the club in recent weeks and months, I think people have really got a renewed, they've kind of fallen in love with the club again. And again, that doesn't go for, I'm sure, for every single person, but there's definitely a feeling of, people are feeling very grateful to be part of Brighton and really grateful for everything that's happened to them, around the COVID crisis and the way it's been managed by the whole club, which has been really fantastic. So I think there'll be a lot of loyalty. I think also sitting alongside that, there'll be people who, well, I know there are people who are sitting at home who have really reevaluated a lot of things in their life. So they might have reevaluated that maybe their job brings quite long, particularly on the football side. We all know football is not a massively family-friendly industry. Its busiest times are summer holidays. That's the beginning of a season, so there's no summer holidays for a lot of people. Christmas, the games come thick and fast. So if you're sort of person who likes to clock off for 2 weeks at Christmas and break up, that doesn't happen in football. So there's lots of reasons why football can rub up against family life and be quite difficult in many areas. And I think there are some people maybe who are evaluating how they can maybe not necessarily leave football, I'm not saying that, but maybe just make some adjustments or reconfigure work, or basically look at their role in a slightly different way and try and somehow redress that balance, because people are really sort of valuing, in many cases, spending that little bit more time with the kids and as a unit. So I think that will cause people to maybe rethink their jobs, not necessarily to move on, although some probably might be thinking that, but how they might readdress the balance in their current role. I think due to the squeeze on budgets, obviously, 80% of our revenues come from broadcasting. So if games resume, we would hope that the broadcasting revenues follow if it's behind closed doors. But the other 20%, it comes from things like commercial match day revenue from ticket sales and retail and hospitality, etc. So if we are playing behind closed doors for part of next season, that will impact our budgets quite heavily. So that will also have a knock-on impact on all of our individual budgets, and that will have a knock-on impact on recruitment. So I'd imagine recruitment will be quite static next season. And I think people will, maybe there'll be a bit more sort of upskilling internally and maybe looking internally for talent. So if there's a massive need, say, I don't know, one of our departments, our business departments has a vacancy, it would be far more likely now, I would say, in the immediate future to maybe look within the business and see what we can do to nurture that talent locally and within, and maybe grow someone into that role. Whereas before we may have been quicker to look outside for that talent. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Thanks, Rose. Thing that people are talking about of entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship, right? So from your expertise and anecdotes, what have current and future employees been looking at, and what do they need to know about it? Why is it so relevant?
Yeah, well, I guess there has been a big focus in the entrepreneurship word, but there's still little know-how in terms of intrapreneurship. And I personally think it's absolutely crucial. So intrapreneurship is when you act within a business unit as if it was your own company, right? So when it's your own company, you actually have a sense or a very high sense of responsibility. You know that you need, for sure, this needs to work, or otherwise it might actually compromise your personal life, right? So I do think that if we manage to think that, yes, it's great to have in mind the entrepreneurship idea, but what if we start perhaps a little smaller? And by saying that, I mean, what if we start as intrapreneurs as a path to become entrepreneurs? So what if we try first to get into a company, understand the intricacies of every industry, of every post, and actually make that part of my knowledge to then better perform as an entrepreneur? And I do think as well, there's something very important in this, is the network. If you want to become an entrepreneur, you will need that network. That network is going to be crucial for you. So if you start by being an intrapreneur, you can perfectly attend some industry conferences, for example, on behalf of your employer, and start slowly building that network and that knowledge that would then serve you as an entrepreneur. So that's where I see the parallel. I don't think we should go one way or the other, but actually use it as a transition. And going back to the education side of this, I do think as well that some universities should use this moment to switch perhaps a bit their way of thinking. Because when, let's say, you have a business school and you set everyone in one specific class, everyone is expected to perform in the same way, in the same subject, within the same classroom, right? What if we can just think ahead and separate the class in terms of the area of expertise that each student wants to excel in? So for example, let's have here on this side all the marketers, here the financial people, the HR people here, and actually make them from university work as they were in different business units and encourage collaboration. I do think that if we do that, we'll be switching a bit the current learning system and actually preparing better the future leaders.
Very, very insightful comments. Thank you, Alejandra. Charlotte, well, we haven't actually told our viewers yet, but you yourself have actually worked in the football industry in the early 2000s. Having been an outsider now for about 15 years and taking that combined experience, right, of your time at Havas and UEFA, but also your expertise for the past 15 years in education, what kind of needs and opportunities do you see for football stakeholders?
Well, when you asked me this question, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I've been away for a while, but I have a very extensive family in this area. So I think it has to do with grassroots. I think I'm gonna bring up some topics that you might have covered in your previous session last week. I think that there is huge importance for all stakeholders in football in investing and developing grassroots opportunities for girls. I think that football is a massive opportunity to tackle gender inequality and more broadly, not just in the game itself, but also in society. I think we're missing a trick if we don't harness the power of football and use it for good. Football is just, in my experience, has been the sole unifying. It just has the capacity and the dynamism to bring people together in a way that I have never, ever experienced again outside of a concert hall, actually, with an orchestra. So it's an extremely powerful tool that we can use. I think that we're on an educational level, we're not sharing globally our knowledge and initiatives. I think that the different stakeholders in the community of football, in the family of football, are not necessarily as open, transparent, collaborative as I mentioned earlier. I think is part of this, the way our society is moving, and I think we're missing a trick there. But essentially, for me, it would be really important to see more progress in women's football and the professionalization of women's football, and using all of these very, very powerful players, you know, in inverted commas, using their position to educate more girls, more boys, society in general, about issues that are fundamental to the well-being of humankind. I think that's the role for me of football, and it can do it. I know it can do it. I've seen grassroots programs just transform lives. You know, music, football, there's not many things can do this, can unite these people. And I think if you, like Rafa, if you work in, you know, for an organization that has that level of sort of human resources, and you can mobilize those people, my goodness, just opportunities are endless, right? Endless.
Yeah, talking of opportunities for all of those who might be, you know, scared about the competitiveness of this industry, well, there you go. You have an opportunity to develop women's football, to develop grassroots, and work your way into the football industry, basically, right?
I think I should also add that when I was in London, I was very involved with an organization called Girls United FA, and they are just, yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of a plug there. Just a phenomenal project. And it's projects like that that need support.
Great. Thanks for mentioning them. Rose, you did mention Tony Bloom, the owner of Brighton, and Paul Barber, your CEO, before. And yeah, for those that know a thing or two about Brighton, they'll know that Brighton's leadership has been remarkable over the past years, and of course also during this crisis with some of the actions that you've undertook. But how has this impacted things such as company culture, diversity, well-being, productivity? How important is it for these things to be implemented from the top down?
I think never more so than at the moment. We are incredibly lucky at Brighton. I mean, I could kind of wax lyrical really about the Brighton story, but we don't have time today. But obviously we have Tony Bloom as our owner and chairman. He's a Brighton boy, so he's got a close association to the football club from when he was a boy, which is quite unusual in club ownership in the Premier League these days. And then we've got Paul Barber, who's our chief executive and deputy chairman. And the whole club's really looking up to those two to lead us through this crisis alongside obviously the senior leadership team. And we all feel incredibly lucky. I mean, I always kind of say that, you know, if you stick me out at sea and give me the steering wheel of a fairly sized boat, anyone could probably have a good stab at steering it on calm water, but stick a 10-4 scale into the equation and you really do need someone who knows what they're doing at the helm. And I think crisis management sets the true leaders apart. And I think, you know, Paul has just emerged as this incredible leader, not just for, we always knew he was incredibly capable and incredibly talented, but over the last few weeks and months, he's not only sort of, put forward the best possible case for Brighton to get the best outcome, but he's also, putting forward ideas for the whole of football. And, he's really trying to do the best for the professional game, and he's working incredibly hard. And I think, what's great about the leadership we have in Tony and Paul, they lead by example. They're very clear and honest and open and transparent. They've been doing, you might have seen, they've been doing press conferences every Thursday, and they've just been like peppered with questions every week. They've just put themselves up there. Some weeks it's Graham, the first team manager. Some weeks it's the chairman. Some weeks it's the technical director, Dan Ashworth. And no matter what question is thrown at them, they'll answer it to the best of their ability. They'll be honest. And I think people have really, really valued that, because everyone is kind of, looking for clarity and looking for honesty. And it's really, really built trust at the football club. And I think, we've got a very strong set of values. We've got our Team Brighton values. And the first value is treat people well. And I think that comes all the way down from Tony Bloom, all the way down through the football club. You feel it through the club. And, Tony himself is very calm, like Paul, very measured, and, cares deeply for people. And we've seen lots of sort of symbols around, around mental well-being. For example, we set up a webinar series called Being Human. And basically it's every week, and it's our welfare and player services manager, Sue. She runs those webinars and basically just talks about being human in this crisis and what does that mean, and basically allows people to feel what they feel and have reassurance that it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to feel guilty because you're enjoying lockdown. It's okay to, decide you don't like your partner anymore, or whatever it is. Everything's okay. But on the very first webinar, the first person to log in and be on that webinar was Paul Barber. So, and people could see that, Paul was on there. So that means that it was important. And that reinforced that he really cares for people. So, yeah, so I think, overall, the feedback I've had is staff they feel reassured. They feel confident that it's Paul and Tony who are steering us through this. And they all feel an immense sense of pride, because Brighton is emerging as, we're doing a lot of things well in the crisis. And I think, there's a massive feeling of pride for working at the football club at the moment.
Thanks for sharing that, Rose. Alejandra, for your next question, I'm going to ask you to take off your FBA hat and put on your higher education expert hat on. I know it's going to be difficult to eliminate any type of bias, but talking about the FBA master, what do you think, as a higher education expert, what do you think makes it so suitable for the realities of workforces, in particular in this modern day and age, and our industry in particular?
Okay, great question. Tricky one to answer. I've personally been an innovation education advocate throughout my whole professional life. And I do think that the FBA has a lot of it, and actually perhaps goes beyond some bold ideas with from how the concept started until today. So going back to what I was mentioning before, the intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship part, I think that's a great match. And actually the FBA started that way. It was created by intrapreneurs, and you being one, Chris, in the football industry, and actually taking it to an entrepreneurship project. So you first gathered your contacts, you first gathered your expertise in the industry, you listened to the industry, and now you said, well, 3 years ago, you said, okay, now we need to do something to change the current education system related to football, right? And that's how the FBA emerged. So starting from the creation itself, I do think that that's quite innovative. Then I would add another thing that for me is very interesting as well. When the FBA started, you were already taking into account, and I cannot take any credit for that because I was not there, but you were already doing your classes on Zoom, something that a lot of universities are right now struggling to actually transition to. So you were already 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago, when the creative process was being done, you were already integrating these digital tools for 21st century expectations within the core of the FBA. So of course, when we are taken now to a moment where, of course, it's a challenge for us and for many, but we were already very much prepared, right? So I do think that that's in terms of the FBA, it's a great advantage, let's say. On another note, the central element, I think as well, is the bridge. So again, I was saying before, the education system is meant to actually train the future leaders of tomorrow for the working environment, right? Now, I do believe that within the FBA, a bridge was actually built since the beginning, in the sense that a lot of actual employers are not necessarily always satisfied by the skills or the outcome that some students get when they get out of university. Now, you went the other way around. So you went to actually ask the market, what is it that you need, so we can actually create a program to have the specific candidates with the specific skills to actually feed the job market. And I think that's very clever. And you thought of an initial curriculum, but at the same time, you are planning ahead of going through those changes as the potential employers ask you for some adjustments. And that's great. I think from having some conversations with Rose and with some other clubs, I do think that a lot of clubs value that a lot, because you're able already to get a sense of what it is that they need, so you can actually better prepare those students and, of course, increase their opportunities to enter that market. So in my opinion, and again, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible, I do think that having created such a hybrid program, if I can call it that way, so integrating the online internship plus on-campus modules, that's certainly one of the best ways to actually prepare those students for what awaits them once they graduate.
Thanks, Ale. And in talking about preparation, Charlotte, you work with a lot of people on things such as confidence, positive psychology, resilience. Can you tell us a bit more about what impact this can have on people and how they choose their career pathways?
Yeah, I tried to spin that question a little bit. Full disclosure, I only work with women, but I think what I do with women applies to men too. I think aside from a personal branding and continued development perspective, because I think we've covered that, I'm going to come at it from a humanist perspective. So I think the question here is, what type of leader, you need to ask yourself, what type of leader do you need to be in order to sustain and to grow yourself and your team for the next X number of years? And I think there are some commonalities amongst the women that I'm working with in leadership roles that I thought I would just highlight really quickly a few of the things that that I would suggest people need to work on, not only to address things like the World Economic Forum's predictions for attributes and skill sets that are required in the next 20, 50 years, but also because it's just good to do as a human being. Self-awareness is a huge one. I think people need to spend time learning about themselves, because you bring your whole self to the workplace. And I think it does you no favors if you don't recognize, like Rafa was saying, things like your own biases and issues that you're going to bring into that space. Nobody's perfect. So I think self-awareness is a big one. Authenticity and personal congruence. I think it's absolutely fundamental nowadays, that people consider what their purpose and what their life values are, in order to make sure that their career choices are somehow aligned to that. Why? Because there's enough research out there to tell you that if you're doing something that you personally don't feel aligns with who you are on a values level, then somewhere down that line there's going to be a problem. Either you'll hit a wall, or you'll decide it's not giving you satisfaction, or you'll find yourself demotivated. And I think that's a big problem. And we're noticing that a lot of our students, no, I'm going to say almost all of them actually, are looking for meaning and purpose over bucks. And I think that's great. I just think that's a wonderful thing. Vulnerability is another thing. So there's a lot about bounce back ability and being able to fail, and to fail well. I don't have an issue with trying. I think that we need to create spaces where people are really comfortable with not getting it right the first time. It's absolutely fine. But the essential thing is that we've created a space where people feel they can try, and they can try again, and they can try all sorts of stuff. So learning to be vulnerable is really, really important, and being able to say, as I say to my team, being able to say, you know, I'm sorry, or I got it wrong. And these are lessons I hate to say I think politicians should learn. But you know, I got it wrong, and please tell me, help me, and let's improve on this. I think mentoring is another area. I think that for your career, I would suggest that people start trying to find mentors really early on. And you can do that really now with the power of things like LinkedIn. You can do that really easily. You can find people that you find particularly inspirational, or perhaps you just would love the opportunity to quiz them for 10 minutes. Not everyone is available, but I tell you, a lot of people are. And I think reaching out now is so important. And especially on LinkedIn, you can actually identify people who are willing to do it. And that's already a step in the right direction. But ask, I would say, just you know, reach out, be bolder. And finally, there's the thing that I would say about the positive psychology approach is that we look at your strengths and your where you're bringing your whole self to the workplace, and your strengths are what you have to leverage. So understanding where your weaknesses lie, understanding where you have space to grow is really, really important, but also making sure that you can maximize your strengths. So that whole self-awareness, discovering who you are, what your strengths are, is so, so important. And finally, all I was going to say was, this is a world of slash careers. I just don't think there is a one career for each person anymore. I think we are looking at a future of multiple careers, multiple opportunities, side hustles, volunteering projects. You know, I just think we have to embrace the fact that it's just not one track anymore, and be really, really comfortable with that. It's okay. And so those are the main things that I find that by coaching my clients, I find that as long as we can focus on that and create that space, and they can be their true selves and bring their own personal kind of version of truth to the space and live their authenticity in the workspace, I find that creates much more psychological alignment with their careers and subsequently success.
I absolutely agree, Charlotte. Thanks for sharing all those great recommendations. And maybe on that same thought, I want to ask all of you one final question, which hopefully as well will serve as a response to some of the questions that our viewers asked over the past hour. Because obviously a big part of our audience consists of people that are either currently transitioning into their careers or are thinking about it. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, right, in these particular times. And that understandably will affect their thoughts, but also their actions, right? So just briefly, each one of you, what message of advice would you give for all of them? Rose?
Okay, I would say be ready. So similar to the rest of the other themes of the other speakers, take the time to make sure that when the time comes, you are ready for that opportunity. And the other thing, I think, because we're all in this state of innovation at the moment and thinking differently about things, like I, for one, I'm really open to hearing offers of help or ways we can do things differently. So say, for example, somebody was out there, you know, one of your FBA graduates, and they went to our, I don't know, our careers site on LinkedIn or on our website, and they could think of, you know, 50 more ways that we could really attract great talent, and we're missing some tricks. I really would love to hear their ideas. So I think there are ways that people can offer and engage by almost kind of giving something before they get something back, if that makes sense. And that could lead to, I mean, it's going to get you noticed, right? So so I think, yeah, see it as an opportunity. Don't get too despondent. Things will get right in the end.
Thank you, Rose. Alejandra, your last 2 cents?
I would say be disruptive. And I know it's difficult right now to think, but a lot of questions in some interviews, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And it's like, oh my God, it's really tough to answer that. But now take it even further. Where do you see the football industry in 10 years? So if you're able right now to actually disrupt in that thinking, and as Rose was saying, there's a lot of people actually craving for creative ideas. So if you come up with, I don't know, a video, an article, whatever it is, that where you can actually share your thoughts, make yourself visible, make a point. What is it that you think? And again, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. At the moment, no one actually knows what's going to happen. But what if you already start thinking, I don't know, how it's going to be the experience if you go to a stadium and you have to actually go beyond the previous expectations with only half or even less of people actually being able to enter a stadium. Think about creative ideas, that you can actually bring to companies, to clubs, so you can, on the first hand, be visible, and on the second hand, also help them going throughout this very difficult times.
Thank you, Ale. Charlotte, any advice that you haven't shared so far yet that you want to share with our audience?
Really, really quickly. Tell me when the world was certain.
Tell me when?
The world was certain. It never was. It's probability and predictability based on past events. So nobody on planet Earth knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, so that's just a fact. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, as long as you can answer the question, what's the worst that can happen? And you've got a plan for that worst, go for it, and go for it with all your heart and passion.
Very wise words. And with that, I think we're running over time, so it is time to conclude this very, I think, interesting session. I want to thank Rose Reed from Brighton, Raphael Fiche from Adidas, Alejandra Otero from the FBA, and Charlotte Hamilton from Nova School of Business and Economics. From my side as well, just one final recommendation. Do feel free to reach out to those 4 beautiful people if you have any additional questions. They're there to help. The only added recommendation I would do is, if you do connect with them, or for that matter with anyone on LinkedIn, just write a personal message. It always makes a big difference. And I think, speaking for myself, having a LinkedIn connection without any personalized message from someone that I have no clue why he or she wants to connect with me, can be frustrating, right? So in terms of, in light of everything that these 4 people have said today, being different, being innovative, being yourself, give a short message, and I'm sure that they will appreciate it and will be willing to help you. So having said that, thank you for everyone who tuned in. If you did join us later or want to share this wonderful webinar with some friends or family or colleagues, this will be available on our YouTube channel, or indeed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts later in this week. As always, stay tuned to our social media channels as we announce the next topic and speakers by the end of this week. In the meantime, stay safe, and thank you for watching.